Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining our today's webinar about ground segment market, where we will see what will be the future trends of the ground station market and how the demand will evolve. So I think it's quite an interesting topics right now because, as you all know, space industry is living a deep transformation with, of course, all these new space trends with small sats being lower cost, with also this new constellation approach, I mean, high revisit for Earth observation or global coverage connectivity for Satcom. We also have traditional telecom operators in the geo orbits that are always trying to increase their capacity with a satellite. And also we are living in the digitalization of the sector. And in the middle of that, we have the ground segment. We talk less about it, but it's an angular stone of the satellite industry because it makes a bridge between the space and the ground. So yeah, it's an important topic, and the ground segment needs to adapt to the new requirement of the space segment in order to give sense to this deep transformation. So yeah, we will go on the presentation, but first let me introduce myself. So I'm Alexandre Corral, consultant at Euroconsult. I am the chief editor of the ground segment market prospect report. So in this report, we assess the driver for ground station and user terminal for Earth observation and Satcom segments. We quantify the market in terms of ground sites, number of operational and sold units, meaning ground station or user terminal, but also the market value. And we provide a good granularity as we provide market estimation of the new build market and the retrofit market with by including also antenna equipment, RF equipment, baseband equipment. And also we provide a breakdown analysis by size of the antenna, the frequency and region of the ground stations. We also provide other more qualitative analysis with a benchmark of industry players. We provide an overview of the satellites launched and to be launched, and also, which is a big piece, the NGSO and NGSO constellation status. And for the premium licenses, we also provide our ground site database, which is a database with more than 2,000 ground sites, where we provide information about the location of the site, the owner of the site, and also the number of antenna on this site with evolution back 5 years ago. So our new edition just released this summer. So and we are now happy to introduce our first results. So yeah, we will start by describing the trends and the key drivers in the sector, show you what will be the demand on the commercial side and also on the government side, which is a bit different with different requirements. And after we will give you some key takeaways about the overall ground segment market. So let's start by the trends. So yeah, it's now hard to talk about a satellite-related topic without mentioning constellation, of course. So constellations are in Earth observation and in Satcom. So if we start by Earth observation, so of course, Earth observation is more about the LEO orbit. Of course, there are some satellites in geo orbit, but for meteo purpose, but they are a minority. And so we are transitioning from a single satellite approach to a more constellation approach with new players like Planet, Black Sky, Satellogic, but also more traditional players moving to the constellation approach like Maxa with Worldview Legion or Pleiad with Airbus with a Pleiad Neo 1. So this new trend tends to populate more the LEO orbit with EO satellites and to double the number of EO satellites in operation by the end of the decade. So with all this new constellation, we have more satellites, we have higher revisits, but we also have frequent communication. And that's where the ground segment play a big role. And we are seeing more interest to have a global network of ground stations shifting from polar location to mid-latitude. As this constellation consists of more small satellites, this operator has a lower cost approach, and also they need more flexibility on the ground to track these multiple satellites in orbit. So we will likely assist to an average reduction of the size of the antenna. And because of ground infrastructure is expensive in terms of capex, and it can be quite difficult for startups to develop both the space segment and the ground segment, and to have also a global network very quickly. We are seeing a growing trend with the ground segment as a service provider offering to outsource communication operation with the satellites in order the operator focus more on the space segment and can have a much faster time to market. So we have, for instance, the incumbent ones, which are KSAT and SSC, who were forming a duopoly, like again 5 years ago, for instance, because they have this very strategic location in the pole. But now that mid-latitude are becoming interested, we are seeing new players like AWS, which locate a ground station quite close to the data center in order to fasten the processing rate of the data. And also we have startups like Atlas Space Operation or even LeeSpace that are deploying very, very quickly. So these players are expected to adapt the ground network and to deploy it massively. And so they are expected to double the number of ground stations by 25 for this type of owners. So now if we talk about Satcom, so you likely know that mega constellations are on the course right now. We have, for instance, O3b, which is the first to be deployed in the MEO orbit. We have Telesat, Starlink, which is deploying massively with the SpaceX. Amazon should come very soon, and they announced a project with also thousands of satellites. And we also have OneWeb. So all these satellites, all these projects are expected to result in the launch of more than 7,000 satellites in NGSO orbit over the next decade. And in terms of satellite capacity supply, we will overtake the GEO capacity because of such a big number of satellites on orbit. So this will multiply by 6 the number of operational ground stations in the future, so by the end of the decade, mainly on the commercial side, but we're also seeing more interest from the defense intelligence side because of the promise of this constellation to reduce latency, but mainly to provide a global and permanent coverage all around the world. And even in the poles, which is not really possible with GEO satellites. So now, if we look at all the operational ground station NGSO all around for all applications, we see that Earth observation was the main, at the most ground station in NGSO, of course, but it will be largely overtaken by the Satcom segment. So yeah, NGSO, the market for NGSO constellation will likely be the highest in terms of growth, but actually it will remain, GEO will remain the largest market by far, despite that, because NGSO will account for only 10% of operational ground station by 2030. This will also account for 34% of the third antenna units during the next decade. And with 20% of the ground segment sales, which is not so. When we look at the number like that, it can be quite surprising to see a difference between the share of in terms of solid antenna units and in terms of ground segment size. But please remind that in our forecast we include also the retrofit market, which accounts for a lot. So that's why we have less in sales than in units. So now if we go a bit upper in terms of orbits, we are also seeing a big transformation on the geo orbits with traditionally regular satellites with a unique spot, which is very large and quite well adapted in terms of coverage for broadcast applications, to HTS and VHTS systems. So HTS stands for high throughput satellites and VHTS for very high throughput satellites. So the difference between regular and HTS satellites, it's the number of spot beams on the ground. So as you can see with HTS system, we have smaller spot beams, but multiple. So this enables to increase the bandwidth and also lower the cost per bit. And it's a good system for broadband connectivity. And so this is quite a new system. And we are currently seeing a number of new deployment in terms of number of ground stations, because you need more ground station by system compared to regular satellites, like up to 2 dozens. And as this type of satellite is well adapted to connectivity, and now we are in the Ku and Ka band for this type of applications. So we use this type of frequency, which are much more sensitive to meteor perturbations. So there is also a need to diversify sites to mitigate rate fade. So this creates an opportunity for new installation, of course. And another trend that we are seeing that is quite new, at least on the satellite segment, it's the virtualization of the ground segment with the introduction of new software technology like software-defined radio that enables to digitize the RF components, a software-defined network that enables to centralize the management of your network, and also to make it more flexible to switch between a network and another. We have the virtualization of functions that are converting hardware components to software. And with all the software, we can also use IP-based protocol, which is very good to take advantage of cloud services that has the advantage to be scalable, to be also adaptable resources. And of course, as we are shifting from hardware to software, we have to expect a cost reduction of the equipment. So this has a lot of interest for, let's say, most of application like Earth observation. So as we were mentioning, Earth observation now need a wide global network for the constellation to communicate. So there is an interest to centralize management and to synchronize also the ground station in the network with virtualization. So this is particularly relevant for ground segment as a service provider who had the largest ground networks, but also space agencies are looking at virtualization because they have also a couple of ground stations. And so, and also, contrary to geo satellites, antenna for LEO orbits are actually underexploited because of the nature of the LEO satellite that is always passing. So what we try to do on the Earth observation segment is to increase the productivity of this infrastructure and make this antenna multi-mission and mutualize the antenna capacity in order to increase the productivity. So that's quite interesting to have flexible equipment on the ground in order to address many satellites on orbit. If we look at the Satcom segment, so the constellation, on the constellation market, there is, of course, a short cycle in terms of renewal, in terms of refurbishment. So, and each time a constellation operator launch a batch, there is incremental innovation inside, and particularly for communication. So, if you innovate on your satellite, you need also to adapt the ground. And when you need such a wide network of ground station, it's more simple to maintain and to upgrade the ground station with the software. We also see interest due to the flexible geosatellites that are upcoming with the recent launch of a Tesla Quantum, for instance. So flexible geosatellites are like HTS satellite, as we talk about, except the spot beams are reconfigurable on demand. So the communication is dynamic, and so the ground need also to be dynamic to communicate with this type of satellites. And there is also a big interest for software-defined network to have a better integration with the terrestrial network, which is key for the satellite to take its place in the 5G transition. And on the MilSatcom, we are also seeing this surprising trend because, you know, the MilSatcom systems used to be closed, dedicated to one satellite because of safety issue, but they are really interested in the promise of NGSO constellation for permanent coverage. So they are shifting to IP protocols in order to be interoperable with this NGSO constellation and shift to another system when there is jamming or when there is not coverage. So, for instance, we are seeing the US modernizing the ground segment. There is also Skynet 6 from UK and Syracuse 4 from France that are using IP-based protocol to be interoperable with commercial systems, but other systems owned by allies. And this, of course, raises cybersecurity issues. So there is definitely a big potential for the software industry to go inside the ground segment. So now if we go on the commercial demand, so if we look at the NGSO constellation, as we said in terms of drivers, so we were seeing in the last 5 years the emergence of first EO constellation, and also the emergence of new ground segment as a service providers that led to the first deployment of global networks. But this deployment should speed up during the next 5 years with all the new ground segment as a service providers. We are also seeing Microsoft coming in the game. So there will be many ground stations sold in the next 5 years, sustained by the constant deployment of EO constellation, and of course the new announcement of EO projects. But at the end of the decade, we expect more a decrease in terms of sales because, of course, all the constellation and all the EO project will likely not succeed. So we expect a consolidation at the end of the decade of operators, and as the ground segment as a service network will end its deployment and become more mature, we will likely see a decrease in terms of revenues for the ground segment. If we look at the Satcom industry, it's more correlated with the deployment of NGSO constellations. So in the last 5 years, there was not so many projects except O3b by SAS, which were deploying in the MEO orbit. But we are also seeing first deployment of OneWeb and Starlink. And the next 5 years will be the main years for sales with deployment of all the mega constellation we talked about previously. And this deployment should continue during the second part of the decade, but with a plus because we will also see a transition towards a second generation because these satellites are small sat and they have also shorter life cycle compared to GEO. So we will see a second generation with new ability in terms of communication and likely a transition towards the QV from the Ka band towards the QV band. If we look at the GEO market, so first, if we focus on the data and services segment, this is a market which is very correlated with the launch of new systems, as you can see. So this looks like cyclic. And for instance, before 2020, where we start deployment of new Ka-band systems that will increase ground segment size in the short term. And then once the Ka-band system will be deployed and mature, we will see a reduction in revenue, and a jump again while we are transitioning to VHTS systems and transitioning to QV band. So this is globally a growing market, but of course with cyclic period, which are very depending on satellite generation. And if we have now a look on the broadcast segment, so we expect more a reduction for this segment. As you see, the last 5 years were pretty stable with two trends, with new entrants for DTH platforms, a consolidation of transmission sites for broadcasters that stabilized the market, so it was not growing or not reducing. But from 2019, we saw a reduction in terms of number of TV channels for the first time, and it's expected to continue with terrestrial competition with a new consumption of video. There is a change in video consumption with OTT and IPTV platform gaining traction. So as a part of the TV diffusion going to IP protocols, this revenue are expected to shift toward the data and services, which is more broadband related. And so we will not really see higher number of sales units in the future, but more a retrofit market with the modernization of infrastructure. First, because of obsolescence, but also because we are transitioning always to higher definition for the distribution of TV. And the only exception will be around the 2022 year, because of US announcing the C-band reallocation to repurpose the C-band for the 5G. So we will have a massive modernization of equipment to adapt to this reallocation. And so we will have a peak in revenues for broadcast in 2020, around 2022. So the number of ground station in operation will reduce because of terrestrial competition by less than 4%. Now, if you have a look on frequency shift on all the applications we just talked about. So if we start by Earth observation, X-band is expected to remain dominant and be the standard. So be careful because S-band look like underestimated, but as we have multi-mission antenna with multi-frequency on board embedded in the antenna, S/X-band antenna are considered in the X-band segment. That's why it may look like underestimated. And if we look at higher frequencies, we are all talking about Ka-band. So we are expecting the slow penetration of this frequency because first there are few projects announced as of today, with mainly from Meteo organization, with EUMETSAT, with Meteosat and Meteo program, with NOAA, with the GPSS program, and also space agencies with Tandemel from DLR. But so far, not so many projects on the commercial side. So we are expected to see space agencies to adapt some ground station and upgrade them with Ka-band, and also some ground segment as a service provider pioneering in the sector to address future Ka-band satellites, but they are expected to remain a minority compared to X-band. And regarding optical, so far, this is not a mature technology, and we are more expected optical ground station sales for demonstration purpose, and it will be a difficult transition because it's completely a new technology. So for instance, we are shifting from X-band to K-band is likely easier than shifting from RF to optical. And there are also more meteorological issues with optical where you need to have a diversified network to ensure communication. So far it's under development, and yeah, we expect few optical ground stations compared to all RF sales revenue that will be generated. If we look at on the Satcom data and services, which is more related to broadband applications, so yeah, future antenna sales will be driven by the launch of new satellites in the Ka band. However, the figure may look like surprising as the Ku band is dominating the market, but actually there will still be more Ku band antenna so it will be more driven by the retrofit market. So that's why K-band is so dominant compared to Ka-band. But K-band is expected to grow in the future. And in the second part of the decade, we expect more QV-band satellites because the telecom operator will want to increase their throughput to face the demand for more data traffic. So yeah, K-band still dominating because more operational ground station and then more retrofit markets. K-band growing because of the new launch system, and QV-band to start to penetrate the market at the end of the decade. And if we look at the Satcom broadcast, so again, we are seeing much more C-band revenues because of the retrofit market. So this will be quite stable in terms of frequency distribution, except around the 2022 year due to the reallocation of the C-band. So in terms of frequency, the equipment sale will be a bit high, will increase around in the short term. So now if we shift in the government sectors, so we are seeing more defense users having proprietary satellites during the last 5 years and also during the next decade. So military users are increasing their capacity supply by expanding their current satellite system. For instance, US is expanding its WGS program. We will have also replacement of systems with higher capacity, like the UK Skynet 6, Syracuse 4, and SpainSat in Europe. And also we expect new countries like Indonesia to procure telecom satellites. So that will likely almost double the proprietary capacity supply in the next 5 years. That will result in a new installation of ground stations, but also large modernization program to replace the reception equipment. Now, if we look at the revenue, so we are around 2.6 billion revenue during the last 5 years, with predominance of intelligence, of the intelligence segment, who has almost half of the market, US defense with a third of the market, and non-US defense having like around 20%. And government spending is expected to increase by 12% in the next 5 years due to the trend we were just talking about because of the more proprietary military supply. And this spending will be part of around 15% of the defense budget for telecom. So yeah, and we are of course expecting more ground stations intelligence market as the number of satellites is growing, also on the commercial side, and as they are monitoring most of satellites in orbits, they will also increase their network. So now if we go on the key takeaways, we can have a look now on the overall ground station market value. So again, as a reminder, it includes the antenna RF baseband market with all the retrofit market and new build market. And so as a reminder, so Satcom, that we expect a growing market from Satcom data and services segment due to the launch of new systems. Defense and intelligence is expected to grow also with higher interest for NGSO constellation, but more military capacity supply and proprietary supply, and they will likely less rely on commercial capacity. They will still rely on it, but less because they have their own capacity. Broadcast is expected to decrease in the future because of the terrestrial competition, despite a boost around the year 2022 due to the C-band reallocation process. And Earth observation is expected a high growth during the next 5 years that will reduce at the end of the decade due to the consolidation of EO operators and the end of deployment of ground segment as a service provider. So as we have more ground stations more operational ground stations on the ground, the market will be more dominated by RF and baseband equipment which have a much shorter life cycle and need to be replaced on a regular basis compared to antenna, which has a longer lifetime. And so the cumulated market value in the future is expected to be around 30 billion. And as we were mentioning, retrofit market will be the main market with 70% of the revenue compared to new builds market. So now we can go through the Q&A sessions. So I saw there was several questions on already. So now I am having a look on it. Have a short drink. So yeah, we have this question from David Andres. What do you mean by retrofit exactly? Can you give some example? So retrofit includes the modernization of the ground station with the replacement of certain equipment. For instance, in the RF segment, in the RF equipment, the replacement of amplifier, of multiplexer, and etc. And so we have all the retrofitting market driven by modernization and upgrade to adapt to the new system on in space. So there is a question from Alvaro. As space development rapidly, what investments in the ground are you seeing to enable to close business model of space investments done? So of course, as we were telling, there is so we have to. There is a deep transformation on the space segment. So, and we have this constellation aiming to have a global coverage and high revisit, and we have to have the good infrastructure on the ground to communicate with. Otherwise, we will not leverage all the value of this innovation on space. So the investment will be to have a global network that we are able to manage with good flexibility. So investments in the ability to monitor the network, likely digitization will be a key technological player in it. So yeah, don't know if you have. So yeah, is Patrick Neal asking is software for mission planning, spacecraft control, TTNC, image processing, etc. fit is included in your ground forecast, and how large is this component? So what you're talking about is more what we talk. It's more about the baseband equipment. So this is included inside. So what is for the control of the ground station and etc. So we included it in terms of equipment and in terms of parts, in terms of investment of the ground stations. So yeah, software is included inside, and we took into account the cost reduction of these parts in the chain. So we have another question. So what has been the COVID impact on the ground signal market? So that's a very interesting question. And I think the COVID impacts show the ability of the business to be resilient because we didn't actually see any reduction in sales during the year 2020, so during the lockdown year. Of course, we saw delays in terms of procurement. So the ground station were likely completed later, maybe in 2021. So yeah, there was delay in procurement, but operators always wanted to install new ground station because they were still launching new satellites. So there were few impact, and the COVID showed good resilience for the ground station market. However, if we talk about the user terminal market, which is more the VSAT-like market, it's more related. It was more affected by the lockdown, with, for example, the mobility market, because we had less planes flying, less travel with the maritime. So on the mobility side, we had a strong impact due to COVID and a global reduction of the number of user terminals sold. So yeah, the ground stations market was pretty resilient. And if we look at observation, there was a big boost in 2020 due to ground segment as a service provider. So yeah, I think we are in the closing of this session. So oh, yeah, so in closing, do stay tuned for our upcoming Cvision series webinar, and save the date with us for September 13th and October 7th with a one-to-one with Aerospace Lab and Boeing. In the meantime, also do stay in touch with us on our social media accounts, and make sure also to check our YouTube channel, where you can revisit our past webinars in case of you miss them. We look forward to welcoming you back with us online for these upcoming dates with Aerospace Lab and Boeing. And once again, on behalf of Euroconsult, thank you very much for joining us today.